Welcome to HortTube. My name is John Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below this video, and I'll pick from those next week. We also put up a kind of a bonus question and answer video in the middle of the week, kind of catching up on a lot of the questions. Now, there have been just a ton of great questions lately. And we'll pick from both of those for next week's Q&A. I think we're going to do a live Q&A, though, next Sunday, so be prepared for that. I'll put up some sort of announcement on YouTube that it's coming, and so you'll know when that's going to be, but there's going to be a live Q&A coming up. There's a $40 discount on the weekly garden planner for the month, and you use the code SEPTEMBER with a capital S to get the $40 off the weekly garden planner. March through September up. October is shot, and I just need to get it edited. I'm working on it right now, and November we're shooting as soon as we get back home. So just trying to stay ahead on the weekly garden planner, ahead of those who have purchased it, and thank you for those who have. Let's see, I think Holly just laid down behind me. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see her back here, but she is out here enjoying the cool morning at Charleston Lake Provincial Park, which is kind of right at the end of the top of the east side of Lake Ontario in Canada. It's a little bit north of that. We're heading to Ottawa, then Montreal, and then heading home. So by the time you're watching this, all of that stuff will have taken place. So let's jump into some gardening questions. We got quite a few good ones. Again, thank you guys so much for participating. We've been hopping around the parks and shooting. This park is so busy that I just didn't want to disturb people out and about. We're in a very private little spot here. Got the picnic table, got Holly outside in the cool air, got Griffin looking at me out the screen, very jealous that he's not out here in the cool air right this second, but I'll get him. He's already had a long walk this morning, so he'll get another one. And here's where we are. Let's see. Somebody asked a great question. What's the number one thing I learned from gardening this year? And I thought it was a good question because, you know, Steph and I spend a lot of time out exploring, you know, like we're doing now, and our thing is definitely a combo between both botany and horticulture. And so we'll explore, you know, the woodland areas like this, and then also explore, you know, like more manicured gardens, you know, gardens like we have at our house, and that combination. So we learn a lot, but I think the main thing that I've gotten more of this year is more of what Ram Giberson always talks about sharing. Like, she built the garden in Athens, Georgia to share it. And so I think that this year when we had the open garden, it was just really fun sharing our garden, you know, with other people, sharing plants with other people, people sharing things with us. We're toting a gardenia around we've had since the Pinkham garden visit back in Norfolk several weeks ago in this trip that we're on. And so I think that's the main thing, is that, you know, that we're sharing not only this information or, you know, help, but also just opening up the garden, being able to visit other gardens, all the welcoming people that are in horticulture. You know, I think that's kind of hit home more than ever this year, especially with the open garden and 800 people showing up at it, and people from California and North Dakota and, you know, Louisiana and other places that came to see the garden. So there you go. Number two. Somebody has a kaleidoscope abelia in Zone 9A, Alabama, with very little foliage. It's in full sun, full heat. Is it too much, or is it a water issue? I wouldn't really know. When you get, you know, when asking questions about why a plant is thin, you know, I don't know what ups and downs it's had. I will say that the reason I picked this question is some of these abelias, especially these variegated abelia, are pretty root sensitive to heat. And that's where growers really struggle to grow them. We can grow these big, beautiful kaleidoscope abelia and other variegated abelia in 3-gallon containers that are like this wide and this tall, and they look perfect in the containers. And you can flip the container over and half the soil falls off. So there's very limited roots. Those containers stay hot, and really the roots don't grow very well in those conditions. So if you are in full sun, which this is a full sun plant, But if you are in full sun and it's, you know, zone 9A Alabama, and it's just, and you plant them spaced out, you know, apart, that's going to give a lot of opportunity for the sun to really work on those roots and damage those roots. I don't know, again, I'm always guessing what these things are, but I do know that about all these variegated abelia, growers really struggle to fill out a root system on them, where that you can flip them out of the pot and then the root ball stays together. It's a real struggle on them, and there's really been probably a shortage of most of the variegated abelia, Miss Lemon and Radiance and others. I go into a lot of nurseries that struggle with them. So that could be it. That's just the spacing of them. And again, this is where we talk about using annuals and maybe perennials temporarily in between these things while they fill in a bit would help with that root heat issue. Somebody has in North Carolina coastal area, zone 8B, a serviceberry, autumn brilliant serviceberry that they planted in 2020. This year it has a ton of lichen on it and water sprouts. Water sprouts are like vertical branches that all of a sudden start coming off the stems. You have these normal branching like this, and then all of a sudden these very vertical pieces come. It's almost like the plant is trying to produce a new leader. Like out of the blue, it's like, how do I rescue myself? And it'll start growing leaders. So when a tree's under stress, frequently we'll see water sprouts on them. And the tree's got a ton of lichen. It gets watered with some annuals around it. It's in the full sun. Is the lichen and the water sprouts a sign of decline? Likely some sort of issue, some sort of damage. I don't know what it is. Again, I'm guessing at what these things are, but lichen in general is not a sign that a tree is unhealthy, because, you know, I'm looking, there's a sugar maple next to me over here, and there's lichen on this side of it. You know, sun's coming up over here. There's lichen I can see. It's a small amount. When I see it really overrunning the side of a tree, there was I think a dogwood and a walk around neighborhood tour video a few months back in the neighborhood. It was just, one side was just completely covered in lichen. You could see the tree was struggling. It was having a hard time fighting back against. A little lichen's okay, it's normal, but when you do see it really excessive on the plant, a lot of times that is a plant that is struggling to fight off things. And then water sprouts are a definite sign, typically a definite, I would say a definite sign that there's something going on with the tree. Again, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's underwatered, overwatered, where it's sitting, whether it was a good plant when you bought it in the first place, whether the roots were broken apart when they went in the ground, if it's having some sort of, I wouldn't know. Unfortunately, everything else is a guess, but yes, it is. Those are typical signs. Overwhelming amount of lichen and water sprouts are probably not great signs of a tree's health. So somebody said you've mentioned a general dislike for barberries, yet you speak well of orange rocket barberry, and then they said it's hard to find. Why the change of heart? And then somebody said orange rocket. Then they said orange rocket doesn't seem to be invasive in Tyler, Texas. Yeah, number one, some barberries are very invasive, up in the northeastern part of the country for sure. My general dislike, I don't know that I dislike barberries all that much. I mean, I grew lots of barberries, gold barberries. I could sell like crazy when those things leafed out in the spring every year at the farmer's market. They just weren't exciting to me. Right, it's just not a plant that's particularly exciting. And I've sold, when you're doing this for, again, 39 years I've been doing this, it's gonna take more than a 3x3 round deciduous red foliage shrub with thorns, to get you excited probably. And so I just think of my almost boredom with them is what I would say, as much as anything. And then of course the fact, they're pretty invasive in some places as well. But there are some, through selections, I'm very careful, and I've become more careful in time not to lump all things into a group, because there's always horticultural exceptions, number one, and number two, somebody's working on that plant to make it better, to make it a better ornamental plant, to make it less invasive, to make it the color last longer on it, or be more vivid, or be variegated, or be something. And so I have become more careful in time to take a whole group of plants and just go, ah, it's terrible. Because I love that Luton Rouge barberry that we have at the house. It's a little, I mean, I would never brag about a barberry, but that thing's this tall and this wide in almost 3 years. It's such a good little plant. And then Orange Rocket, having seen them, I knew it had a great habit, but having seen the way Jay Sifford used them up in West Jefferson, it just was like, whoa, that's a whole nother level of cool. We're looking at those kind of umbrella-shaped barberries out in the middle of that open perennial border, open perennial garden meadow. He has stylized meadow, I think is probably what I would call it. A little different angle. The sun was changing quite a bit. I think you can see Harley laying back here. Now, somebody's up in Zone 8B in Washington in the Puget Sound. A lot of the plants they buy are B&B, balled in burlap, meaning they were grown in a field and then dug up and then wrapped in burlap and sold to them. So balled in burlap or B&B. You'll see that written. I didn't do a lot of B&B stuff as a landscaper, some trees, but I'll put almost any container tree against a field-grown tree. There's just more of a planted in the ground and it just starts growing with the container stuff, where the balled and burlap stuff took a little while to reestablish itself after being dug out of the field. But with all that said, a lot of the B&B stuff has clay-based soil, and that was true with all the boxwoods that we had at the garden center when I was a kid. We sold these boxwoods that were in these basically clay bags of burlap. He wants to know if he should remove the clay. I don't think you'd be able to remove it very easily without doing significant root damage, so I just wouldn't. But I would mound them up just a bit to make sure that that's not going to be a source of, the plants drowning in the future. And the clay does have good nutrient, a lot of nutrients in it. So I think, overall, long term, it's not going to cause the plants any problem to be in a different soil than your native soil. And I think if you try to get in there and start pulling clay off those roots, you're going to do more damage than good. So I'm just going to plant them like they are and try to get as much of that burlap cut off as possible. That burlap buried down in the ground does not break down as fast as we would like it to. It does break down, but when you deny something light, you give it a lot of moisture, it either breaks down poorly or doesn't break down at all, if it's not given light. So I try to get as much of that cut off as you possibly could without doing a bunch of damage. Let's see. Somebody said, shout out to the Women's Plant Nerd t-shirt for ladies. They're soft, comfortable, and attractive. Thank you so much for buying it, and thanks for the feedback on it. They're over on the website, HortTube.com. Let's see. This person sees seasons in terms of cultural changes, like football starting or school starting, rather than by weather or climate. And they were just saying that that's just kind of how they think about, summer ends when school goes back, rather than September 20th or, the start of it being June 20th. And, I think that a lot of things, to do with climate are really based on your area. I mean, summer starts in Raleigh sometimes by the 1st of May, and sometimes it's late May before summer. And by summer, I mean not like this, June 20th to September 20th or whatever it is, but it's 95 degrees outside. And so that's summer to the plants. And so there's a definite difference between how spring, summer, fall, and winter affect our plants based on where we are in the country. We were up visiting Erin, the impatient gardener, and she's on Lake Michigan there, and Lake Michigan keeps her garden extremely cool through spring. She has a hard time just getting started gardening in the spring because that lake holds on to that cold for so long. But then in the fall, she's getting paid back because the lake warmed up so much during the summertime that it makes her falls much longer than they would be in other parts of the same area. There's definite, it just moves her seasons around on the calendar a bit, and it depends on where you live as to what you're calling summer or winter or fall or spring. For us, we have a very short spring. Typically, we're going to see Jason Isbell in Montreal, who's one of my absolute favorite musicians, and he said in a song, we get a week of spring and then summer's blistering, talking about Tupelo, Mississippi, and that's kind of how I feel in Raleigh. But then we get to paid back with this really long fall of nice, cool nights, typically a very dry season, and you can do a lot of outdoor activities in the fall. So just our seasons are different depending on where we live, and we have to learn that about how that affects our gardens, as well. Let's see. So somebody had a horrible Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia drought this summer. Is it a good idea to cut back plants, cut off blooms to help plants root to get through drought? I don't know about cutting them back so much, but you can, if they're flowering things, you can definitely take the flowers off in that first year, maybe even the second year sometimes to help things get through. It is very difficult for the plant to try to do both, all of the above. Like we put it in the ground in April and then expect it to put on roots, flowers, and new growth, and look good at the end of the season. And so I end up with these questions. Well, the plant's thin, the plant's off color, there's something going on with it. Went through a lot trying to do all of those things. So in some cases, especially if you live in extreme areas or you're planting something and it's not the best time to plant it, it might be a good idea, to cut off flowers. And cut off flower buds and that kind of thing, and just say, hey, you can take a year just to get yourself prepared for next year. Let's see. So somebody asked about compost as a form of mulch to help moderate moisture, or would they end up with more weeds? Compost is absolutely a fantastic mulch. I mean, as long as it's from a hot compost. Meaning that it went through an actual composting process of heating up and making sure that the weed seeds were killed and maybe disease issues were killed. Any of the material that was in there, basically having control over it. Here comes another RV past the spot here. So that's important, is how the compost came to be. It went through a hot cycle. Otherwise, you will be putting weed seeds out. Do I end up, so here's the question. I compost the vegetable garden as mulch. We also put some wood chips in the path in there, which compost over the course of the season, but most of the vegetable garden is just covered in compost, whereas my ornamental landscape areas with the shrubs and the herbaceous perennials and trees and all that are mostly done with hardwood mulch. Do I get more or less weeds? I definitely get more weeds in the vegetable garden. Part of that is a little bit of foot traffic. I put a little bit more foot traffic probably overall in the vegetable garden because you're in there picking, you're in there messing around with it. And the compost is going to move a little bit more, whereas that hardwood mulch just kind of locks down a bit and creates a better ground covering overall that will prevent light from getting down to the weed seeds and allowing them to germinate. Again, we're still getting weeds everywhere, but my hardwood mulch beds have less weeds in them than the compost does. That's for sure. But compost is a perfectly good mulch because really all we're trying to do is cover the ground in organic material that the beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi can eat and turn into fertilizers. And a lot of times in the compost, it already is in those forms for our plants to use. Keep the ground covered to prevent moisture from evaporating. This was part of their question, was it still keep moisture in place? Yes. And it's going to prevent some weeds, but I think you're going to have a few more overall. And when it rains, I think that compost is going to move a bit more, which is going to allow for some more weeds as well. Somebody planted some Brigadoon St. John's wort correctly, and then after rain, the root ball is showing. Is there... will leaves falling protect the crown, or should she cover them with some compost? I would probably so it's pretty easy to plant something and then have a heavy rain come along and wash some of the material off those roots and expose those roots in some way. We can have We can have animals help us with that. We can have squirrels definitely help us with that, digging around things and exposing roots on things. Yeah, you can come back and compost over those roots, or just use your fall leaves to cover them up. Or if you want to, you can put a shovel under them and just kind of replant them pretty quickly as well. But I think anything you get covering those roots a little bit, don't bury them too deep, but just get them covered a little bit. And again, leaves, compost, mulch, doesn't really matter all that much. That Brigadier St. John's works pretty tough ultimately, and it'll survive, a few ups and downs along the way. Somebody asked, will Rudbeckia seed heads feed the birds? Yes, as long as it's not a sterile variety somehow, which I don't think most would be, but as long as it's one that produces seed, then absolutely. Any of our native perennials in your gardens, from Vernonia to Echinacea to Rudbeckia, all of them are going to produce some seed. Liatris and others are going to produce some seed that the birds are going to come along and take advantage of, especially this time of year as they're migrating. We're up here in Ontario, and there's very few. I hear birds in the background back here, and there's a few, but a lot of them they've flown the coop already, so they're headed down my way, or by me probably. Let's see, person removed grass and then put down pine bark nuggets. Nut sedge is happy with covering the nuggets with a layer of shredded hardwood mulch. Discourage sedge or help break down faster. I probably wouldn't cover that those pine bark nuggets in hardwood mulch. I kind of don't know what to tell you here. I think you probably, once you have a nut sedge problem like this, pine bark, I've talked about this. I like really fine pine bark for growing container plants, possibly mixing into our clay soils to improve drainage when you're planting something not necessary, but has benefits. But I don't really like to use pine bark as mulch. It doesn't do what the hardwood mulch does, and just really mat together, or even the wood chips mat together better and prevent weeds much better, I think. Just having different materials. The bark is like cork. The pine, there's a pine right here behind me. It's like cork, and every time it rains, it moves around. Anytime you walk in it, it just really moves and shuffles a lot. It never really locks into place. And so you do get more weed issues through it. So I don't know how big of a space this was, but there are some sedge killers if you want to use a chemical on the sedge. That's a possibility. Or, you could cover it for some period of time. You could pull these pine bark nuggets back and use that box method that people use for putting down boxes, or put a piece of plastic down temporarily to kill it, and then use the hardwood mulch, and then I'd put this bark back, maybe use this bark for something else. But again, I just don't like to use pine bark mini nuggets or nuggets as top mulch, especially if you have any kind of slope at all, because it will definitely move around and float around, and you'll end up potentially with these weed related issues. Nut sedge is one of those weeds that really comes in worked areas. So I don't know how much this bed was worked before, but like in my vegetable garden, as an example, where I'm working the bed all the time, that nut sedge just really thrives in spaces that are have a lot of human activity in them, being broken up all the time. So somebody said wood chips have zero nitrogen, even leach it out. Thoughts on adding grass clippings to provide nitrogen to chips to mix to speed up the benefit? Yeah, almost certainly some sort of green material would help. But if they're fresh wood chips, like they're just, if one of these trees is taken down and you get all parts with the limbs and the leaves and the bark and the wood material, it's going to have all it needs to break down pretty quickly. If the pile's been sitting around for some period of time, the green element in the wood chips has probably dissipated some. And so some sort of green material like leaves or grass clippings or something like that would be beneficial to help it break down a little faster. So it just really would depend on the age of it. but most of the time you're going to get wood chips. It's the entire tree. They've taken an entire tree down and they've run everything through that chipper, and it has that perfect combo of the greens and the browns in it. The nitrogen thing, you know, that it needs nitrogen to start to break down, but then it releases that nitrogen later. So it's not even that, it's not that big of a deal. But again, fresh wood chips, I don't think you need to. Older wood chips, it may be beneficial. And but be careful adding grass clippings that may have weed seeds in them. I mean, I don't know if your lawn clippings or have crabgrass and other things in it that may be adding weed seed to your beds. What kind of bikes do we have, and do we like them, and are they electric? I've got a Giant that's a hybrid, and Steph has a Liv, which is Giant's bikes for women. We've really liked them. I've had these bikes for years. We've had these bikes for years now, maybe 5 years, and have put a lot of miles on them. We carted them all over the country, now carted them into another country, and spend a lot of time riding the bikes. I do like my Giant, and it's not electric, but there are electric bikes everywhere now. It is like the thing. I mean, people are just have gone all in on electric bikes, and so we see them everywhere. They're very heavy, which would be, you know, I don't want to have that on my hitch necessarily. I think people are pushing the limits of their hitches with 2 electric bikes bouncing on the hitches through these, you know, state parks and things. So I'm worried about breaking a weld on a hitch at some point. Our bikes are super light. When I say they're hybrids, they're not mountain bikes and they're not street bikes. They're somewhere in between, so we can do a little bit of these kind of gravelly roads in places without any problem. Nothing extreme, but then they also work on the street equally as well. But I do like my Giant bike. Let's see. So somebody said in the second North Creek video how Arden and Steve were able to have those plant names just roll off their tongues, and those Latin names of the plants. Yeah, if you know, the kind of business they have, the people that they're selling the plants to, you know, it's all in the, you know, done with the Latin names. It's not really a lot of common names, because especially in what they're doing, where they're doing perennials, herbaceous perennials, a lot of the common names can just overlap one another, and depends on where you are in the world, who you're selling to, and that kind of thing. The Latin name becomes more and more important, you know, to make sure that that person's getting exactly what they're asking for, and not if you do it by some common name, you never know, you know, what you're going to end up getting.